Welcome to Founder Radio. I'm your host, Hugo. In this podcast, you'll hear in-depth conversations with the globe's most exciting company founders. We'll talk about their ideas, their successes, their challenges, and their learnings along the way. At Founder Radio, we celebrate founders, and we believe that innovative founders are critical to deal with the challenges humans face. They are society's explorers and work in uncertainty to expand our practical knowledge each and every day. Building something from scratch requires creativity, intelligence, conviction, and endurance. Get inspired and learn from those that are changing the world. Hello and welcome everyone. Dear listeners, I'm excited about today's episode. We're talking to Sophia Hummelman. She's a co-founder of ReCarbn. And ReCarbn is a CO2 direct air capture company, planned live since September 2022. It's a young company. It plans to launch a plan in 2028 that can absorb 50,000 tons of CO2 per year and has just announced a partnership with Deep Sky in Canada to build a smaller version of that plant. She's worked in the financial sector at JPMorgan and iFund, Paris, London, and Amsterdam, and has an econometrics degree from the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Sophia, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well.
Great to have you. Let's dive right in and start with the basics. What does your company do?
Yeah, sure. So ReCarbn, as you said, is a direct air capture company. But what does that actually mean is that we filter the outside air and we extract the CO2 out of it. And then you're left with pure stream of CO2. And then with that, you can do all sorts of things.
That's super clear. Thank you. And one of the reasons I find this super interesting is that in my mind, in the public debate about climate change and CO2 problems, it's a lot about CO2 reduction, which of course should play a huge role. But it feels to me that direct air capture is a bit underrepresented and under-discussed. What's your take on that, and where do you see this going, and where do you think direct air capture is, say, in 2050?
Yeah, I think it's a very common topic we discuss almost every day. But indeed, a lot of the talk about climate is about reducing our emissions, which 100% should happen. And yeah, we support that fully. But indeed, what people are not talking about enough is the need for the removal of CO2. And whereas a lot of people say, okay, let's focus on reducing now and then the removal is not that important, we would actually argue, okay, we need to reduce now, but we also need to start working on technologies that are going to be able to remove by 2050. And yeah, from now until 2050, we need all that time in order to develop these technologies to the best of their abilities to be able to remove at full capacity at 2050. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it looks very much like we will not be able to even remotely meet the targets that we've set for reduction, right? So that almost makes direct air capture a necessity to get close. Does that make sense to you as well?
It does. It's a bit of a depressing thought, but it is what it is. But indeed, what we have found is that in order to reach the 1.5 degree scenario, we will need even more removals than we initially thought. Whereas that means for us that the carbon removal business will be much bigger. It's actually very bad news. And it's bad news. But on the other hand, I hope that the urgency also urges people to work harder on reductions.
Mm-hmm. And early on this podcast, we had Jacqueline van den Ende, who's founded a fund focusing on companies and other funds that aim to reduce climate change. And we spoke about the unit of pain per unit of CO2 reduced to get a bit of a sense of, hey, how can we pick the best way to reduce CO2 without causing a lot of pain with the populations? And I was wondering, could you elaborate a bit on how DAC compares to CO2 reduction in that sense?
The way that industry is developing of direct air capture is that right now we are not really putting the burden of removals at the individuals, but more at a company level. So we are targeting mainly larger corporates who have very big net zero ambitions, and we help them achieve, let's say, the last 10 to 15% of emissions because they are just simply not able to reduce them to zero. So in that sense, it does not have at this point a direct impact on individuals. How I could see it in the future, that individuals can also reduce their carbon footprint to a certain level, then maybe they are left with like 10 to 15% of emissions that they simply can't reduce. And those can then be removed. And that's mainly a financial burden because they will have to pay for CO2 removal.
And is it more expensive on average to remove, say, a ton of CO2 or to reduce in the sense of not emitting it in the first place?
So right now, as all these removal technologies are in development, it is still more expensive to remove as opposed to reduce, probably. At some point, those two are going to balance out and get to the same level. And that's also probably the point where further reduction is not possible anymore and the point where you will need removals. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Could you speak a little bit about the capacity of CO2 removal now and also in the future? Because we can talk about direct air capture being great and maybe at some point also being cheaper than removal or being the only option when you can't remove anymore. But if the capacity is constrained, it might also not be a solution. So could you speak a little bit about that, both for ReCarbn but also for the other players out there?
Yeah, definitely. So from the perspective of the entire industry, Boston Consulting Group recently came out with numbers of where the industry is standing now, what the estimate is in 2030 and in 2050. So right now, in terms of direct air capture, the capacity is below 0.1 megatons, and it will require a scale up of times 160 by 2030. So 16 megatons in total. And then from 2030 to 2050, it will require another scale up to 1.8 gigatons of CO2. So these are very significant steps. But in terms of announced projects in 2030, we are on track to reach the 16 megatons.
What are the main challenges on the road to there?
Yeah, there are many, I would say. I think mainly in terms of technological challenges of scaling up these technologies, but also funding is a large challenge. So actually last year marked, I would say, quite a fundamental year in direct air capture. There have been very large funding rounds. For example, Climeworks, who raised around $100 million. The first very large-scale commercial plants have been announced and also have received funding. So it is starting to ramp up, but it was quite an issue, I would say, until last year.
And what do you do with the CO2 that you capture?
Yeah, so currently, because we are still, of course, developing our technology, we chose to find a good use case with our pilot plant. So with the pilot plant, we actually were feeding the CO2 to a algae reactor. So algae can actually use the excess CO2 to grow faster. So it's just like, it functions as a fertilizer, essentially. That was a good decision to do at that scale. But now the next steps we are taking is building a 10 times larger unit. And we will be deploying that unit in Canada together with Deep Sky. And there actually we are going to run tests in order to use the CO2 and store it away permanently. So then you are really speaking about a removal because we are capturing it out of the atmosphere. And together with Deep Sky, we give it a permanent place. And this way it will be removed from the atmosphere forever.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And congratulations on the partnership, by the way.
Thanks.
Can you elaborate a bit on your business model? And if there's a distinction, and maybe also now and later, and maybe the partnership is a good example of that?
Yeah. So I think similarly to a lot of hardware startups, of course, the first couple of years are very focused on developing your technology further, getting to TRL level 9, 10. So for now, our business model is just finding these strategic partnerships, demonstrating technologies together. We are also working on feasibility studies together with clients where we also help them assess the options for carbon removal. So that's also part of our business model now. In the future, we see that working is that we are just licensing our technology. So we will not become a project developer, but we will license our technology to partners like Deep Sky who are interested in removal. But another important market in the future will also be the use of CO2 in, for example, the conversion to methanol, which can be used for various chemical components, but also materials and even e-fuels.
Why the licensing business model? Why not, for example, build the plants yourself and maybe sell the CO2 or even grow what you can grow with the CO2? How did you land on that decision?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things, but the main reason is that we want to be able to focus on the technology development now and in the future. And actually deploying the technology and building these units requires a lot of in-house expertise as well. And actually for that, we see project developers having a much more prominent role. And also it makes more sense for them to take up these projects because we are a technology developer, but we are not the project developer.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, that's super interesting. And could you tell a little bit about how your solution, your technology compares to some of the others out there? For example, a Carbion, you mentioned other players already.
Yeah, definitely. So let's put it this way. You have a very broad landscape of various direct air capture solutions, but if you divide the types of companies that are out there, I would say there are three. So you have much larger ones that are around for a longer time. For example, Climeworks. They are really at a scale with their plants that is like reaching the pre-commercial phase. Then there's the second group of companies that do have an idea that has been validated on lab and pilot scale, and they are taking the next steps to pre-commercial. And then the third category is more really like experimental lab phase. So we fall within that second category. So within that category, there's also various technologies. And the way we see it is everyone is working towards the cheapest price per ton of CO2 removed. But there's a lot of external factors that influence that. So, for example, some technologies could fit better in very humid environments or in very warm temperatures, whereas other technologies might be better even in freezing temperatures. The truth is we don't know, but we know that our technology has an energy consumption that is competitive within the second category of companies. And also our design is easy to scale, which is also an important factor to consider.
And is energy the main input, or are there other inputs that you need for your solution to work?
Yeah. So it's the energy demand for us for the unit to operate. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And for the company, when we zoom out a bit again, like what are your top 3 goals for this year?
For this year, the big focus is really making sure that we finish the detailed engineering of this next unit in the next 2 months. Then we will start the construction of this unit, and then comes the commissioning phase where we will actually start testing the technologies and gather key learnings. So that's really the focus for 2024. And then in 2025, we will take those key learnings and start working again on a newer, improved unit and also finding the ideal location for that unit.
And what's your role there? And how do you cooperate with the team? Do you have a super clear division of tasks, or is it just everybody runs after different things that they like? How do you organize for that?
No, I would say we are pretty organized, but it's also because our co-founder team, we are 3 together. So I am really more focused on the commercial part of everything. So making sure that we do these feasibility studies, making sure that our brand is built, which we're really at the start of, but it's a very important factor. So everything commercial, marketing, business development related. And then Guus and Ewout, my co-founders, they are really more on the technology side. So that's a very clear distinction. And then between Guus and Ewout, there is sometimes some overlap, but Ewout is really in charge of only product development, and then Guus is overall CEO. So we do have quite distinct background as well. But I would say some issues we don't know which category they fall in, so then we just solve it together.
Okay. Yeah. And how did you go from working as a banker and investor previously to founding ReCarbn? It looks like there's a large difference between those roles.
Yeah, definitely. I think you wouldn't see it like from my CV. But the idea of starting a business or working in a startup has really been part of, I would say, the last years of my studies. So I actually did 2 student boards that were focused on student entrepreneurships. And I always loved the idea and kind of the energy of the founders that we met during those years. But I was doing econometrics, and you have this like very traditional career path of either going into consulting or finance. And I ended up in finance. And whereas I always had the ambition to found a company at some point, also specifically in climate, I also really wanted to get hands-on experience and be in an environment where I'm just like very much pushed to my limits. And investment banking was a very good environment for that. But I think I realized pretty soon that I wanted to take that step into climate tech, essentially, sooner rather than later. So then I ended up in VC, and the idea was to really start to get to know the landscape better in the Netherlands, specifically what startups are out there, what technologies are very promising. And that's how kind of that search started. And
okay.
Yeah.
A research project to know where to start your venture?
Well, kind of. I didn't go into it like that. I really imagined myself working in VC for like, let's say 3 years. But then, things accelerated a little bit faster than expected.
And was your interest in climate tech and climate solutions there for a long time already?
Yeah, for sure. I can remember very well that at some point during this student boards, we did a social entrepreneurship masterclass event. And I really had a moment where I was like, wow, it's so beautiful to see that these are very good solutions as well. But also I could just see that the people working on the solutions were so impact driven, and that's really left a mark on me.
Interesting. And before that, or was it really during that it sort of sparked in your head and that you wanted to go that direction as well?
No, it was definitely only, I think, even that specific event. I think before that, I was still in the phase of, I don't know what to do. And I was studying econometrics. So I was more like, okay, let's just have a good career, but no idea what to do with it yet.
And then how did you make those decisions, the decisions of study and starting banking, investing? Could you expand a little bit on sort of your trade-offs, the way you thought about approaching those, and then eventually also the decision to start ReCarbn?
Yeah, well, 2 things. I am a planner. So I think with every career decision I made so far, I had a very good plan in my head. So when I started in VC, the idea was to eventually maybe either as a founder or as an employee end up in a startup. So I think I kind of did craft it in a way to get to this point. But at the moment of the decision making, I have talked to a lot of startup founders that were looking for a co-founder. I applied for various accelerator programs as well, even got accepted. So I did do my research. And then at some point, actually, I met Guus, who just was thinking about founding ReCarbn, and he was looking for more of a commercial role in the team. And the idea of direct air capture, I already heard about, I think 2 years before that. So we just started talking, it really clicked. And then the more and more I learned about the technology of ReCarbn and also the plans that Guus had, the more I realized, okay, this could actually be a very large opportunity. So in that sense, I would say it was kind of a coincidence that we met each other, but I have been crafting the path to meet him.
Got it. And are you 100% a planner, or is there a lot of room for gut feel and intuition as well?
Oh, no, there's a lot of room for gut feel as well. I think specifically the moment of deciding to join ReCarbn was also a combination of being spontaneous, but also planning, in the sense that I just said, okay, this idea is really great, but we do need a bit more time to assess it. So we actually worked alongside for 2 months. For me also to understand the idea better, and for Guus and I to see, okay, are we going to work well together? And then, so it was a spontaneous decision to start doing that, but then I do take the time to think about it.
I think you planned your way indeed almost.
Yeah.
Then it was a gut feel decision, and then you took 2 months to basically make sense that you
validated
that was validated that your brain agreed with doing it.
Yeah.
That's a good combination of the 2 modes. And when you look back, what are your highlights so far at ReCarbn?
I think the past year, we set some goals at the start of the year. So January 2023, the most rewarding feeling was that by the end of the year, we actually reached all of the goals. So I think in the moment itself, you don't really realize it. But then I always try to take a little moment to kind of reevaluate, like, okay, what have you actually planned? What did you achieve? And the two biggest things were really getting funding for the idea and being able to get people on board who also believe in it as much as we do. And the other thing is landing a partnership for the next unit, which was really like the biggest commercial goal. And those were also the two highlights of the year.
And in terms of your day-to-day, how do you feel? What do you love about doing this?
That's also a big accomplishment, I would say. So in terms of the specific role I have at ReCarbn, it's just a very good personal fit to me as well. So what I loved about investment banking was really the part of speaking to your customers, making sure that that relationship is well maintained, but also trying to get in new business, presenting new ideas, really the business development part. And then the final thing was the deal making part. So not only presenting for the business development, but actually landing the deal, doing the contracting. And all those three components I have within ReCarbn. Only this time it's with a bit of a larger purpose. So at some point in investment banking, I felt like, okay, now we are just making already very successful, rich companies even more rich, so to say. And with ReCarbn, the overall goal of reducing global warming is just very motivating each day.
On the flip side of all that, what do you struggle with? What's tough in this role?
I think what I've struggled with the most is the fact that you don't have an example in this role. So that sometimes brings a bit of insecurity about certain topics. So I feel like that's a bit of it's a steep learning curve as well. So whereas I think a couple months ago, I had some moments where I was like, I'm actually quite unsure. Now I also realize that I do have a lot of the expertise and experience to make certain decisions. So I think it's a bit like building more confidence in not having that example.
Yeah. And deal with that otherwise. Do you also seek advice, for example? Or are you more the kind of person that then really relies on their own decision-making and rationale to make those decisions that you're mentioning?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. So for me, either I am very confident in the decision and I know very well what my arguments are and I'm confident in it, or I have like some sort of doubts and then I go out, start validating with other people. And sometimes, even though I would have validated, I would actually still go with my gut feeling and make the same decision. But definitely, so combination.
And who are you most influenced by? Do you have any examples in your own life, heroes otherwise, that help you do what you do?
Definitely. I would say I have quite a strong support network around me. So my partner, actually a very big part of my family as well. Both my dad and stepdad are running their own company for basically their entire career. So that definitely helps. And the biggest issues we have, I will also always try to discuss with them. And it's just nice to be able to talk to people who have kind of went through similar things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you come across as quite a values-driven person. You mentioned impact. You mentioned you're not feeling for making those big successful corporations even more successful. Could you tell us a bit more about what your values are and how they came about?
Yeah. I think I was kind of raised in a way of try to really have a successful career, not necessarily the impact part. So I don't know, just like be ambitious, try to be your best self, stuff like that. But then on the other hand, I was also raised to be very compassionate, I would say. And that's like mainly the maternal part of my family. And then I'd say the business part was more like the paternal part of the family. So I think those things like came together very nicely in a way that we are not only focused at ReCarbn at making an impact and running the company to the best of our abilities, but I'm also thinking a lot about our own well-being in a way, but also of the first employees we have. We do have some interns, also future employees, and really thinking like, okay, what makes or breaks a company in terms of the employers they have. So what are the companies that have happy employees and what are the companies that don't, and what are the factors that influence that. So that also aligns with my values, I would say, to make sure that everyone in the company is also as happy as we are as a co-founder team, essentially.
And then your two values can go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
You get further with a happy team. And what luck did you have in life, would you say, Sophia?
Oh, I feel like I'm just a very lucky person in general. But sometimes, people would say like, oh, she's so lucky. Like, oh, I don't know. Like sometimes you get these comments, right? And then I'm like, okay, but it's not only luck. You also, of course, work for it. But I think just the fact that I was raised in a family with very good role models who were also very supportive of me developing myself is the best thing that could have happened to me. I think that's where the ball starts rolling, right? You come from a supportive environment, you do well in school, you do well in university, and then the ball just rolls and rolls in a positive direction. So I think that's my biggest luck.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I think like what you're doing is awesome. You've taken the leap and started this company with a big mission. What do you recommend to people in their 20s that want to be founders as well?
I think the biggest recommendation is, if you really want it, start making a very tangible plan. Like it shouldn't just be an idea that's like lingering in your head, but really write it down. That's what I did at some point. I was like, okay, I really want this, but I'm not really taking concrete action. Start making a 5-year plan. Start writing down what the field of the company would be. What are kind of the main achievements you want to see in 5 years in the company? How much impact does it have to make? And really try to quantify even some of those things. Write it down and then start working one step at a time, but really do make time for it. I feel like a lot of, especially people around me who are like, oh, I actually have like similar ideas. I would love to do it. I'm like, okay, just dedicate like 30 minutes of your day every day to work on it. And I guarantee that you will take like steps to achieve it further, but like, don't just let it linger.
Solid advice. Is there anything, as we almost wrap up, is there anything that you'd need or would like to ask the audience for the company, for you personally, anything that you're looking out for?
Yeah, definitely. For ReCarbn, we will be hiring mainly in the field of engineering very soon. So if you would like to just have an informal chat about that, I'm super open to that always. And people from bigger corporates or companies in the chemical sector, perhaps, that are listening, if you are thinking about securing a sustainable CO2 supply for the future, then it's always good to have a chat and see if there are any opportunities there, as we are always just looking for new ways to actually use our CO2.
Cool. Well, everyone, don't be shy. Reach out to Sophia Hummelman. She's on LinkedIn and is findable on many other places, on the ReCarbn website as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. And Sophia, before we wrap up, do you have any last words or any last recommendations or thoughts you want to share with the audience?
I hope that the people that are listening are impact driven as well in their career. And if you're not, it's not too late to try to steer your career in a certain direction to really make a change.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for the time and for being open and sharing everything about ReCarbn, about yourself with us. Best of luck, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.